Imagine fighting gravity, stereotypes, and history all at once, just to touch the sky. This is the story of the women who refused to stay grounded, who grabbed a cockpit before they were even allowed to dream of one, and who turned doubters into believers with every takeoff. From patched-together planes to combat missions and commercial jets slicing through clouds, these aviators didn't just fly, they changed the whole game. So buckle up, because we're diving into the battles, breakthroughs, and breathtaking moments that took female pilots from overlooked to unstoppable. This is how they rose, and why the world could never clip their wings again. The wind of progress was once a whisper, and in that whisper, women heard possibility. When men ruled the skies and the idea of a woman flying seemed absurd, a few dared to dream higher. Against doubt, fear, and ridicule, they reached for engines, wings, and freedom. Their courage defied not just gravity, but the world's expectations. This is not only the story of aviation, it's the story of determination that soared beyond limitation. From the ground to glory, these women didn't just chase the sky, they claimed it. The story of women in flight begins where the world was just learning to rise. In the early 1900s, the skies belonged to men, or so it was said. The Wright brothers' invention had sparked a fever of flight across the globe, but few believed women could ever share that freedom. Aviation was a realm of danger, machinery, and prestige, qualities society thought unfitting for women. They were told to watch, not to fly. Yet, among the crowds of spectators stood women who felt something different stirring inside them. They didn't see danger. They saw destiny. Raymond de la Roche was one of them, a woman of ambition and fierce resolve. In 1910, she became the first licensed female pilot in history. France watched in disbelief as she lifted her fragile craft into the air, hair whipping in the wind, heart burning with defiance. Every takeoff was a rebellion, every landing a victory. Her courage broke the first barrier, proving that the sky did not discriminate. Still, her triumph was a solitary one. For most women, access to flight schools was forbidden. Instructors refused to train them, declaring their presence a distraction or a danger. Newspapers mocked their efforts, painting them as novelties or spectacles rather than pioneers. But where the world tried to close doors, determination found another way. Some taught themselves, others traveled abroad, chasing the rare chance to learn. The early aviators fought not just the physics of flight, but the weight of expectation. They risked their lives in machines held together by wires and wood, yet what they faced on the ground was often worse. The disbelief of a world that could not imagine them aloft. Still, they flew. And in every climb, every roar of the engine, they carried a message that the sky was not a privilege. It was a right, waiting to be claimed. The years after World War I brought both opportunity and uncertainty. The world was rebuilding, and the dream of flight no longer belonged to a select few. Airfields appeared across continents, and engines grew stronger, faster, more reliable. Yet even as aviation advanced, the idea of women flying still seemed like a spectacle to many, but those who had seen the sky refused to return to the ground. They wanted not just to fly, they wanted to prove they belonged there. In America, a young woman named Bessie Coleman dreamed of flight from the cotton fields of Texas. She faced barriers that went beyond gender. She was both African American and Native American in a nation that offered her no chance to learn. Every door was closed, every school refused her. But her resolve did not waver. She learned French, saved what little she earned as a manicurist, and crossed the Atlantic. In 1921, in a field near Paris, she became the first woman of her heritage to earn a pilot's license. When she returned home, she didn't just fly. She performed breathtaking stunts, loops, and dives before awestruck crowds, proving that courage had no color and no gender. "The air is the only place free from prejudices," she once said, and up there, she was untouchable. Across the ocean, other women were carving their own paths through the clouds. Harriet Quimby, elegant and determined, became the first woman in the United States to earn a pilot's license in 1911. Clad in her signature purple flight suit, she captured the public's imagination, flying with a grace that masked the danger of her craft. In 1912, she made history again, crossing the English Channel alone. Few celebrated her, for her achievement was overshadowed by tragedy elsewhere that day. But in the years that followed, her courage echoed among women who saw in her flight a new horizon. These women were not alone. In Russia, Lydia Zvereva earned her wings, defying social constraints and mechanical odds alike. In Britain, Hilda Hewlett opened flight schools and encouraged others to take control of the cockpit. In Germany, Melly Bies became a test pilot, flying machines she built with her own hands. Their names may not all be remembered, but their legacy formed the scaffolding upon which the next generation would stand. Every flight was a statement. Every takeoff, an act of defiance. The newspapers still called them bird women, reducing them to novelties, but their passion burned brighter than ridicule. They flew in long skirts, in open cockpits, in the biting wind of early morning. They repaired their own engines, learned navigation by the stars, and braved storms in planes made of fabric and wood. What they lacked in recognition, they made up for in resolve. By the 1920s, a quiet revolution had taken hold. The world began to take note, not with applause, but with curiosity. Women were no longer just passengers. They were pilots, instructors, racers. They took to the skies, not as exceptions, but as pioneers. Their dreams spread across continents, whispered from airfields in France to hangars in the United States. The barriers that once kept them grounded began to crack, not through favor, but through undeniable proof of skill. For every woman who fell, another rose to take her place. The early aviators of the 1910s and 1920s did more than fly. They changed what it meant to be fearless. Their courage planted the seeds of equality in the clouds, showing the world that the sky was vast enough for everyone willing to reach for it. The 1920s and 1930s became the golden age of flight, a time when the roar of engines filled the skies and adventure captured the world's imagination. Airplanes had evolved from fragile crafts into sleek machines capable of spanning oceans and continents. The world was obsessed with speed, altitude, and distance, and for the women who had once been told they could not fly, this was the era to prove that they could do it all. Aviation was no longer just a dream. It was a stage, and women were stepping into the spotlight. Among them stood Amelia Earhart, a name that would echo through history like the hum of a propeller cutting through wind. She was not the first woman to fly, but she became the face of possibility. With her leather jacket, calm smile, and determined eyes, she carried herself with quiet confidence. In 1932, she became the first woman to fly solo across the Atlantic Ocean, facing icy storms and exhaustion for nearly 15 hours before landing in Ireland. When she stepped out of her Lockheed Vega, mud-splattered and shivering, she did not speak of fame or heroism. She simply said she wanted to fly further. Her courage inspired millions and gave women everywhere the proof that daring was not defined by gender. But Earhart's greatness was not hers alone. Behind her were dozens of women pushing the limits of aviation. Ruth Nichols, nicknamed, quote, the Flying Debutante, broke altitude and speed records. Louise Thaden won the Bendix Trophy, outpacing male pilots in long-distance races. Florence Klingensmith set world records for endurance and speed before her untimely death in competition. They were united not by fame, but by the hunger for the horizon, the thrill of leaving Earth behind, even if only for a few hours. In 1929, a historic gathering took place in Long Island, New York. 99 licensed female pilots came together to form an organization that would give structure to their growing presence in the skies. They called themselves the 99s. Amelia Earhart was chosen as their first president. What began as a small network became a sisterhood of pilots who supported, trained, and encouraged one another when few others would. Their message was simple. Women belonged in the cockpit, and together they could ensure their place there. The 1930s turned aviation into spectacle and science all at once. Air shows drew crowds in the tens of thousands. Pilots became celebrities, and planes bore nicknames as familiar as movie stars. Women entered air derbies, endurance flights, and record attempts once reserved for men. Yet every success was met with skepticism. Headlines marveled at their accomplishments, but often reminded readers that these were exceptions. Still, they pressed on. Every race won, every altitude record broken, was another crack in the glass ceiling of the sky. Amelia's disappearance in 1937, during her attempt to circumnavigate the globe, left the world in stunned silence. Her loss was mourned deeply, but her legacy endured. To the women who followed, her final flight was not a tragedy. It was a symbol of boundless ambition. She had not fallen. She had simply flown beyond sight. The golden age of flight was a time of heroes, and women were no longer footnotes in its story. They built aircraft, tested engines, and trained others to follow. Their names might not all be written in history books, but their courage was etched into the clouds. The era proved that flight was not a man's pursuit. It was a human one. And as the 1930s drew to a close, the rumble of war on the horizon would soon call these women to a new purpose, one that would take their wings into history once more. When the world went to war again, the sky became a battlefield. Nations needed planes, thousands of them, and pilots to fly them. For the first time, necessity outweighed prejudice. The same societies that once barred women from the cockpit now turned to them in desperation. Factories roared with the sound of production, and the call went out. Pilots were needed everywhere. Women answered, not to prove themselves, but to serve. And in doing so, they would redefine what it meant to fight. In the United States, hundreds of skilled female pilots came forward to join a new and daring program. They were called the Women Air Force Service Pilots, the WASP. These women flew powerful aircraft across the nation, ferrying bombers, fighters, and transports from factories to bases. They towed targets for live-fire training, tested repaired planes, and trained male cadets. They faced every risk their male counterparts did, but without the same recognition or rank. They wore no uniforms at first, received no military status, and if one of them died in service, there was no flag-draped coffin, no salute, no government assistance to bring her home. Yet they flew anyway, because the mission mattered more than medals. They trained in the heat of Texas, learning to master aircraft that could turn deadly with a single mistake. They took off in B-17s and P-51 Mustangs, the engines screaming with power, their hands steady on the controls. These were not women seeking fame. They were aviators who knew the weight of the work. Among them were legends like Jacqueline Cochran, the program's director, and Nancy Love, who commanded the ferrying division. Together, they led more than 1,000 women who would deliver over 60 million miles of flights before the war was through. Across the Atlantic, Britain's Air Transport Auxiliary, the ATA, welcomed women to do the same. They ferried Spitfires, Hurricanes, and bombers through fog and storm, landing on short airstrips surrounded by chaos. Pauline Gower led them with calm precision, while pilots like Mary Ellis and Lettice Curtis flew aircraft of every size and purpose. They were paid less than the men, but their skill silenced doubt. When a male officer once questioned a woman's ability to handle a Spitfire, the reply was simple: they fly just the same, only lighter on the controls. But nowhere did women take to the skies more fearlessly than in the Soviet Union. There, under the order of Marina Ryskova, entire regiments of female aviators were formed. The most famous of them became known to the Germans as the Night Witches. Flying old, slow biplanes made of wood and canvas, they struck fear into enemy troops. Under cover of darkness, they cut their engines and glided silently over German camps before releasing their bombs, disappearing into the night before anti-aircraft guns could track them. They flew up to 8 missions a night, often without parachutes, their faces blackened with soot, their spirits unbroken. These women, led by Raskova, became legends, not just in their homeland but across the world. Everywhere the war raged, women proved that courage was not a matter of uniform or title. They navigated storms, dodged gunfire, and delivered planes that would win battles. Yet when peace returned, their wings were quietly folded. The WASP program was disbanded in 1944, and its members sent home without honors. The ATA was dissolved, its records stored away. The Night Witches, though celebrated, returned to a society eager to forget their wartime equality. Still, history could not erase what they had done. For the first time, women had flown not for glory, but for victory. They had shown the world that the sky was no place for limits, and that in the darkest moments of war, bravery could wear any face. When the guns fell silent, the legacy of these women did not fade. It lingered, high above the clouds, where freedom and courage still meet. When the war ended, silence returned to the skies. The roaring engines that once carried women across continents were grounded, their missions completed, their uniforms folded away. The world they had fought to defend now seemed to forget them. As soldiers returned home and nations rebuilt, women who had proven their skill in the air were told their services were no longer needed. The cockpit doors that had opened during wartime began to close once more. For many, it was as if their wings had been taken back. In the United States, the women Air Force service pilots were quietly disbanded in 1944, even before the final victory was declared. Their records were sealed, their contributions erased from official history. They received no veteran status, no benefits, and no recognition. Some were forced to pay their own way home from bases where they had served their country. When a WASP pilot died in service, the government refused to cover the cost of returning her body to her family. Her fellow pilots would take up a collection to bring her home, draping a simple American flag over her coffin by hand. For 3 decades, their courage remained buried in silence. Across the Atlantic, the women of the Air Transport Auxiliary faced a similar fate. The ATA was dissolved in 1945, and its pilots were told to return to their former lives. They had ferried Spitfires, bombers, and trainers through some of the most dangerous skies in Europe. But when the war was over, few thanked them. Their pay, already lower than their male counterparts, vanished with their positions. Some returned to small flying clubs or civilian work, but most found their dreams grounded by economics and expectation. In the Soviet Union, the Night Witches returned as heroes, yet even they were not immune to being forgotten. Their bravery was celebrated in propaganda, but in reality, many struggled to find their place in peacetime society. The war had given them purpose and equality. Peace returned them to a world where both were rare. They had flown through fire, but once the smoke cleared, their wings no longer held the same value. In commercial aviation, the story was no brighter. As airlines expanded in the post-war boom, women were welcomed aboard, but only as flight attendants, not as pilots. The image of the smiling stewardess replaced that of the woman at the controls. The cockpit remained closed, a domain reserved for men in crisp uniforms and polished caps. When women applied to fly, they were told they lacked the strength, the composure, or the authority to command an aircraft. The same hands that had guided bombers through combat were now deemed unfit for passenger planes. For many former pilots, it was a cruel paradox. They had proven themselves under fire, yet in peace, they were invisible. The newspapers that once praised their bravery now moved on, their photographs fading from memory. The world celebrated progress, but not the women who had carried it on their wings. Still, they did not abandon their love of flight. Some taught, others built small businesses, and a few continued flying privately, unwilling to surrender the sky that had once been theirs. In time, a quiet determination began to stir again. The fight for recognition was not over, it had only changed form. Former WASPs petitioned Congress for decades to acknowledge their service. They wrote letters, shared stories, and refused to be forgotten. Finally, in 1977, the US government granted them military status, acknowledging what had always been true. They had served, and they had done so with honor. The post-war years were a period of loss and resilience. The women who had flown through war faced a different kind of battle, one against indifference, but they did not fade into obscurity. They carried their experiences forward, quietly shaping the future for those who would follow. They had once been warriors in the sky. Now they became keepers of memory, waiting for a new generation to rise and reclaim the wings they had so rightfully earned. The post-war skies slowly began to open again for women, but progress was measured in inches, not miles. The 1950s and 1960s saw men reclaim the cockpit in airlines and militaries, leaving women largely to ground roles. Yet determined aviators refused to accept permanent grounding. They pushed boundaries in private aviation, in experimental aircraft, and in pursuit of records. These decades became a quiet era of preparation, where the seeds of modern female aviation were sown in defiance and determination. Jacqueline Cochran, already a legend from her wartime service, became a beacon of what women could achieve. She set multiple speed and altitude records in jets, breaking barriers that men had long thought unassailable. Cochrane became a symbol of excellence and professionalism, demonstrating that women were capable of handling the most advanced aircraft of the age. Her accomplishments inspired a generation of female pilots to seek challenges in planes that once seemed out of reach. Commercial airlines, slowly modernizing, began to hire women as pilots, but opportunities were scarce and resistance remained strong. Women had to prove themselves repeatedly, often outperforming men, to be considered equal. Each successful landing, each completed flight, chipped away at the prejudices that had kept cockpits closed for decades. For many, it was not just about flying. It was about staking a claim to a profession that had long ignored them. Military aviation also began to change. Jeannie Leavitt became the first female fighter pilot in the United States Air Force, breaking centuries of tradition and shattering stereotypes. Her success proved that courage and skill were not defined by gender. In the same years, other women followed, joining fighter squadrons, serving as instructors, and participating in complex missions once deemed too dangerous for them. These women were carrying forward the legacy of wartime aviators, transforming historical precedent into a living reality. Spaceflight emerged as the new frontier, and women once again reached for the stars. Eileen Collins became the first female space shuttle commander, a position requiring precision, composure, and leadership under unimaginable pressure. Her journey demonstrated that female aviators could excel not only within Earth's atmosphere but beyond it, in the vacuum of space. Across the globe, women were piloting commercial jets, commanding helicopters, and testing experimental aircraft, proving that the sky was no longer a limit, but a beginning. As the jet age advanced, female pilots around the world began forming networks and mentorship programs, ensuring that each new generation could rise faster than the last. Women shared knowledge, training, and encouragement, breaking isolation and fostering a community that had been denied for decades. They celebrated milestones, from solo flights across continents to speed records in cutting-edge aircraft, each achievement a reminder of the determination and resilience that had carried them this far. By the late 20th century, the presence of women in aviation was undeniable, though still incomplete. They had moved from novelty to necessity, from exclusion to expertise. The journey of these aviators was no longer just a story of defiance. It had become a testament to vision, skill, and unyielding courage. The skies were theirs not because society had granted it, but because they had refused to be grounded. Their legacy, forged in struggle, paved the way for the pilots who would continue to push boundaries in the decades to come. The 21st century brought a new era for female aviators, one defined not by scarcity, but by possibility. The barriers that had once seemed insurmountable were steadily breaking, replaced by recognition, opportunity, and ambition. Women now commanded fighter jets, piloted commercial airliners across continents, and navigated spacecraft beyond Earth's atmosphere. What had once been extraordinary was becoming expected, yet the courage and skill required remained as extraordinary as ever. Svetlana Kapanina, a Russian aerobatics champion, captivated audiences with breathtaking maneuvers, loops, and spins that seemed to defy gravity itself. Her flights were a testament not only to personal mastery but to the evolution of women in aviation. She demonstrated that excellence in the sky was universal, not bound by gender, nationality, or expectation. Every sharp turn and daring dive reinforced the truth that women could excel in precision, speed, and daring just as men had. Innovation also opened new doors. Jessica Cox, born without arms, became a licensed pilot, using only her feet to control the aircraft. Her achievement challenged every assumption about ability, resilience, and determination, proving that the human spirit could adapt to any challenge. Her flights inspired millions, showing that aviation was not only a profession, but a symbol of freedom and limitless potential. Across Asia, Africa, and the Middle East, cultural and societal barriers began to crumble. Women in Saudi Arabia took to the skies for the first time as commercial pilots. In India, Captain Aisha and her colleagues led flights across domestic and international routes, inspiring countless young girls to consider careers once deemed impossible. Across the globe, the presence of female pilots grew steadily, no longer confined to a handful of pioneers, but part of a growing, visible movement. Mentorship became a cornerstone of progress. Experienced aviators shared their knowledge and networks, encouraging young women to pursue aviation and aerospace careers. International organizations, scholarships, and aviation programs ensured that skill and talent, not gender or background, determined who could soar. In doing so, they built a community united by passion for flight, one where each success opened doors for the next generation. Women now flew not just for personal achievement, but as ambassadors of possibility. Their flights inspired educational programs, STEM initiatives, and global awareness of equality in aviation. They challenged stereotypes daily, proving that skill, courage, and vision were what mattered, not gender or appearance. Every cockpit they occupied was a testament to decades of struggle, perseverance, and triumph. The modern sky is diverse, inclusive, and limitless. Women pilots from every corner of the globe share the airspace with men, pushing boundaries of performance, endurance, and exploration. Their journeys reflect the cumulative legacy of every pioneer who came before, from Raymond de la Roche to the Night Witches, from Amelia Earhart to the Wasps. The sky they inherit is not just empty space, it is a canvas for ambition, a realm where equality is realized not through permission, but through achievement. The rise of female aviators in the modern era is proof that barriers, no matter how deeply rooted, can be overcome. It is a story of determination, innovation, and courage carried forward on wings of progress. Each generation reaches higher, flies faster, and inspires more, reminding the world that the sky belongs to those willing to claim it and that the spirit of flight has no gender. The legacy of female aviators is not measured only in records, medals, or headlines. It is measured in inspiration, in the lives they touched, and in the barriers they shattered for those who would follow. Every flight taken by a woman today is a continuation of a journey that began over a century ago, when the first pioneers dared to defy gravity and expectation alike. Their courage set a precedent, proving that determination and skill could overcome even the most entrenched social norms. Each generation of female aviators builds on the achievements of those who came before. When young girls watch a jet soar across the sky or see a woman command a cockpit, they are witnessing proof that the impossible can become reality. Mentorship programs, international aviation organizations, and global networks now ensure that knowledge, support, and opportunity flow from experienced pilots to newcomers. This is not just a passing of technical skill, it is the transmission of confidence, resilience, and vision. The influence of these pioneers extends beyond the cockpit. They have reshaped how society views women in leadership, in STEM fields, and in roles once considered unattainable. Their presence challenges stereotypes, shifts perceptions, and inspires not only those who wish to fly, but anyone who has ever been told that their dreams were too big. The skies are a metaphor for potential, and female aviators remind the world that ambition knows no bounds. Globally, their impact is felt in communities where aviation was once considered inaccessible to women. From rural villages in Africa to cities in the Middle East and Asia, girls now see pilots who look like them, proving that heritage, culture, or circumstance need not define their future. These women are not merely participants in a profession. They are symbols of possibility, embodiments of progress, and living proof that courage can redefine history. The connection between past and present is profound. Every modern pilot owes a debt to the trailblazers who risked life and reputation for the right to fly. The Night Witches, daring, the Wasps, dedication, Amelia Earhart's bold journeys, and every early flight across oceans and continents form a chain of inspiration stretching to today's cockpits. Their stories remind us that progress is cumulative, built on the courage of those willing to challenge the impossible. The rise of female aviators is far from complete, but the trajectory is clear. With each new pilot trained, each record broken, and each barrier dismantled, the legacy of those who came before is reinforced. Women now occupy every corner of aviation, commercial, military, aerobatic, and even spaceflight, transforming an industry once defined by exclusion into one shaped by achievement, skill, and vision. This legacy is not simply about celebrating accomplishments, it is about ensuring that every young person who dreams of flight knows that the sky is not a limit, but an invitation. The courage, determination, and innovation of female aviators serve as a living blueprint, showing that talent and ambition are the only requirements for soaring. In honoring their stories, we honor the boundless potential of those who continue to rise, and the generations who will follow them into the clouds. Their stories remind us that history is not shaped only by grand victories, famous names, or celebrated moments, but by the quiet, relentless courage of those who dared to rise long before the world was ready to see them soar. As we look back on the journeys of these women, from the early pioneers who sketched dreams across the sky with fragile wings, to the fearless wartime pilots who flew without recognition, to the modern aviators commanding aircraft that circle the globe, we are witnessing a legacy carved from resilience. Their determination turned doubt into progress and progress into possibility. Every generation of female aviators carried a different weight. Some fought for the right to train, others fought for the right to fly, many fought simply for the right to be seen. They confronted barriers that seemed immovable, yet pushed forward with a resolve that made the impossible gradually feel inevitable. The world did not open the sky to them. They seized it one flight at a time, one risk at a time, one victory at a time. Their journeys were not just about flight. They were about proving that talent and passion are not defined by gender. They transformed hangars, airfields, and cockpits into spaces where skill mattered more than stereotype. In doing so, they redefined what leadership looked like. They expanded the boundaries of innovation. They inspired generations to imagine futures that once felt unreachable. Each woman who stepped into a cockpit became a symbol of what happens when courage refuses to wait for permission. Today, their influence stretches far beyond the aviation world. Their persistence set a standard for anyone striving to break through a barrier, enter a field dominated by doubt, or pursue a dream that others could not yet understand. Their stories echo across classrooms, workplaces, and homes, reminding us that progress is built by those who dare to question limits and redefine expectations. As more women enter aviation, the legacy grows stronger. Young pilots look up not only to the sky but to a lineage of role models, whose paths were carved with difficulty yet brightened by determination. Modern aviators continue to push boundaries, not just by flying higher or faster, but by opening doors for those who will follow. When a girl sees a woman at the controls of an aircraft, she sees proof that her dreams are valid, her ambitions are powerful, and her future is wide open. The story of women in aviation is still unfolding. Every takeoff adds another chapter. Every milestone reinforces the truth that courage is contagious. Every pilot who steps onto a runway carries the spirit of those who came before, and the hope of those who have yet to arrive. The sky, once guarded by doubts and restraints, now stands as a reminder that limits are meant to be challenged. As long as there are women who look upward with determination, the legacy continues. Their victories remind us that the horizon is not the end, it is the beginning. Their courage shows us that the world changes when someone decides to rise, and their stories, carried on the wings of countless flights, will continue to inspire anyone bold enough to believe they were born to fly.